Hello, let me introduce you to George. George is bright, curious, restless. He watches movies about old engines, he takes apart electronics, and he asks questions about wind turbines. But in school, George is not thriving. He's told to sit still, he's told to focus, he's told to revise differently. And by the end of year 6, George has absorbed the quiet message he is not one of the top students. We could ask the question, why doesn't George fit this system? But the better question to ask is, why doesn't the system equip George for the future that he's growing into? Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Much of our education architecture was designed for a different century, with a different workforce, and with a different understanding of knowledge. Yet we ask that system today to train our young learners like George for AI, climate transitions, and industries that have not yet been invented. Now, in primary school, we do many things well. George learns to read, to count, to work in groups. But he also realizes that neat handwriting is revered more than mechanical exploration. That quick recall is held in higher esteem than slow exploration. By the end of primary school, George realizes that he is an average student. A system that groups our students into tiny categories narrows the futures that they can imagine. Now, primary school shapes identity. Secondary school shapes direction. At 14, George picks his GCSEs and his choices narrow. He doesn't pick art because it won't lead to anything. He doesn't pick design and technology because he hasn't been exposed to the subject enough to decide whether he wants to take it or not. At 16, he picks his A levels and his choices narrow again. In chemistry, he learns about a process called cracking, which is where crude oil is distilled into petrol and diesel, one of the very key processes that underpins climate change today. He's learning about the problem, but not being given opportunity to solve that problem. Around him, George sees electric vehicles, hydrogen energy, and green steel. He suspects the curriculum is changing quicker, the world is changing quicker than the curriculum he's studying. And with that, teaching can no longer be about imparting knowledge. It must be about training our learners to be resilient, adaptable, and systems thinkers. They must be allowed the opportunity to prototype, to practice, to play, to fail safe, and to try again. Now, George might go to university, he might not. Access to university has increased greatly over the past few decades, and that must be celebrated. But that access does not mean alignment. Recruiters often ask for adaptability, problem solving, and communication skills, but George will really be tested on these. The challenge is not only for the young. George's father has worked in logistics for over 30 years. Automation is creeping in and changing his job. The idea of a job for life is quickly disappearing. George will pivot more than once, and so will his father. And given that, lifelong learning must not become a slogan, it must become infrastructure. Flexible courses, modular credentials, and employer-led reskilling must become normal. And that gap is already prevalent. We're short of tens of thousands of people to fill the green skills gap needed by 2030. Battery technology, solar farms, hydrogen systems. George could be working in one of these areas, and that gap would narrow. But there's another problem as well. George is ranked percentile compared. His parents ask, what did the other students do? When they should be asking, what did you learn? Recruiters recruit based on capability. What can you produce? Not where you were in a distribution curve. So imagine if we brought industry and education into closer orbit. Designers, engineers, and entrepreneurs in classrooms working with students on real-world projects. That gap would narrow. The education system is worth billions to the UK economy. If George is working in one of those sectors, he doesn't become marginal, he actually becomes economic. So large-scale progress happens when things become a mission. Imagine a collective commitment to equip every young learner like George with the knowledge, skills, and mindset needed to create a sustainable society. If we were redesigning education tomorrow, knowing what we know about AI, climate transitions, and labour market volatility, what would we keep and what would we redesign? So rather than a whole raft of reforms for you, I give you an organising logic, 3 shifts that move us from inheritance to intention. Number 1, modernise legacy content. Update taught curricula so it is facing the future and our future needs. Number 2, engage with industry. Bring together educators and employers so students can work on real problems that are local to them. And number 3, make lifelong learning accessible to all. Allow George and others to change career without having to start again from scratch. But ambition requires belief that systems can change. It requires educators and industry to come together, and it requires politicians to think in longer timescales than their own tenure. I started with George. George is not an outlier. George is one of thousands of students that sit in classrooms today, not visible by the very system that they sit in. If we redesign the education system for the future, rather than defend it for the past, George becomes visible. The Victorian education system fed factories. Our challenge is different. Unlock human potential while protecting the planet. The system isn't broken, it's a launch pad. If we like the engines, thousands of students like George will not simply adapt to the future, they will build it. Thank you.